Alrighty, welcome to the Grow a Pair podcast. And today I have Nicole Engelbrecht, who is a true crime podcaster and author and proudly South African.
That is correct, yes.
That is fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Yes. So, welcome to it. I'm very, very interested to, true crime's not my thing. So I'm very interested to dive into it with you because I think the only true crime kind of thing that I ever really bothered with was the axe murderer in Stellenbosch.
Yeah.
And I was like living in Somerset West. I knew someone who knew the family kind of thing.
Oh, right. Okay.
And then maybe I'll ask her.
I think there's a few cases that everyone can speak to, just one or two that no one could tear themselves away from.
Yeah. I had a couple of people that were friends with Oscar as well, and the two sides, and it was he didn't do it intentionally, and then the other side was like, how did he not? And the whole big boxing match around it and whatnot. It's amazing how the lines are drawn.
Yeah, absolutely. And still to this day. Yeah, absolutely.
And you dive into all of this willingly.
I do, yes, absolutely by choice. It's a fascinating world, and it's a world that's always fascinated me. I never thought I'd be able to actually do it for work. It always used to be sort of a secret, dark hobby that I was a little bit ashamed about. But now people pay me to do it. So
that's fantastic. Yeah. It's so weird, but true crime seems to be a girl thing.
Yeah.
Like I know a lot of girls. My wife goes crazy over some of this stuff. She reads these books and watches these videos and I'm like, cool, I've watched a few.
Yeah.
I think more that gets my sort of blood pumping is the fraud type ones, where it's like, I watched one I was sitting today doing something or other and I just kind of had my phone running in the background and switched to this video. And I think since I've been talking to you, I believe there's this guy from the FBI that, sits and listens to your phone,
Okay.
And then they listen to your phone and then it's like, oh, true crime. We're going to send them more true crime on TikTok now. But my whole phone and all my feeds are kind of blown up with these crime stories.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think the one that came across my path today was this chick that worked for a law firm of some kind, and they were administering trust funds and investments and all that, and stole 17 million rand from, and 5 years they didn't catch her.
Yeah,
and then
a few like that.
Someone looked at the books after 5 years.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I mean, I scrutinize the books of my company pretty hard,
Absolutely. Yeah, it's mind-blowing what some of these people get away with. Yeah.
What got you into it? What is the genesis of you getting into this, and what was the moment? Because look, podcasts now are getting more and more and more popular. I think we're almost hitting critical mass now. But you started a little while back. It wasn't. I started a year ago, and in South Africa, the podcast scene was almost fleggling.
Yeah.
I was maybe for a year and a half I was thinking about it. Joe Rogan was the guy. And there were one or two others, Diary of a CEO wasn't massive yet. They were big, but they weren't massive. And all of a sudden, in a year and a half, everything's
exploded.
Just boom.
Yeah.
But what was your start?
So I started 5 years ago, 2019. I was in corporate management for 20 years.
Yes.
Yeah. And then in 2019, had a bit of an early midlife crisis and decided I wanted to give myself a chance to try a creative entrepreneurship. I was going to do a range of different things, freelance writing, blog management, all sorts of different streams of income.
The normal, I'm going to do social media now.
I'm going to do lots of different things.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And and the podcast was going to be a small part of it. Or so I thought. And really, I think the topic... it probably was always going to be true crime because it was something. It's just something I'm interested in.
Sure.
Something I've always been interested in, and South Africa did not have a true crime podcast at that time, and the scene is still pretty small for true crime podcasts.
I did a little bit of homework, and it is a little sparse. There are a few guys. There's some guys on TikTok that aren't doing YouTube, which boggles my mind. And then one or two others, but nothing with the kind of I think, following that you've got. You've got a pretty decent following there.
Yeah. So, and I mean, I'm trying to grow that because, I'm honored to be able to pioneer this space in South Africa and, the true crime space in podcasting. And I do try to mentor as many people as I can in true crime content creation. Really looking back, when I looked at true crime podcasts in like the US and the UK, I really saw that it wasn't just entertainment. A lot of them, yes, there were the wine and crime people and those types of things, but then there were the podcasts that were really actually making a real world difference.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really sparked my interest in using the podcast medium for true crime, was that South Africa certainly needed something like that, where cases could be discussed that weren't being discussed in the mainstream media anymore, and you could bring in new tips and get cases restarted and all of that sort of thing.
Okay, you're going from that angle. Okay, I was thinking like, because you know how everyone watches their NCIS and they go, I've watched every season. I can get away with murder now.
No. For me, it really was. It was a matter of, so many cases got unsolved in South Africa, and
way too many,
we just didn't have a platform like the US and the UK were using. And I thought, why not? And luckily it actually has gone that way. So a lot of the unsolved cases I've discussed have brought in new leads, and some cases have been reopened as a result of being on the podcast. So goal achieved.
That must make the blood pump, right? That really must get the blood going.
Yeah, because it takes it out of fantasy world.
Yes.
I know consciously that these are real people and real stories I'm talking about. I mean, I often talk to family members and, that sort of thing. But it takes it out of this is some little, forgive the term, mental masturbation thing I'm doing and just talking to thin air, and actually makes it real. It's this case that hasn't been touched by the cops in 20 years, and because of the podcast's following and people's buy-in and me talking about it on the podcast, it's actually made a difference. It's amazing.
Well, that's, I quote this quote way too often, but with great power comes great responsibility. That's fantastic. Like I never, not that I wouldn't think that I think I've just never let my brain go down that road of like, okay, cool. If we create a bunch of noise around something, I mean, a 20-year-old case being reopened, that's insane.
Yeah. It's amazing. And I mean, it's really, it happens on social media a lot, it's when posts blow up and the authorities take notice. Sadly, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, or whatever the saying is, So they do have a lot of cases to look at, and no, they're not going to go back and look. But also what I found is when you're telling the story the way that I do on the podcast, 20 years later, the people that knew something back then that didn't say anything, whether they couldn't or they didn't want to, will now hear that victim's story, and something starts to niggle at their conscience. And that's often what has happened. The circumstances are now different 20 years later. And the cops don't know that because they're not going to go back and look for those people and re-interview them just randomly. But hearing the story on the podcast has had these people sit up and go, actually, I knew that information back then and I said nothing. And that's really what has been happening.
Yeah. How much... for me, it's a very interesting subject because you are, I don't want to say playing, it's the wrong, but that's the word that came to mind, but it's the wrong word. But you are touching on people's emotions. You're touching on real life.
Yeah.
You're touching on horrendous circumstances. There's pain, there's hurt, there's anger, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
And you, at the end of the day, are doing it and say earning some money out of it and getting some kind of notoriety and fame out of it. How are you juggling like that research process? Like you say, you've spoken to victims, you've spoken to family members, that kind of thing. How are you? Like, I'd have a hard time doing it, but like I'm 6'1" beard, like I look rough around the edges. You look a little softer, so you've got that going
get to know
for you.
Me.
Well, I suppose you've got to have a hard head to break through some of this stuff. But like, what's your What's your process, and like, what's your thought process around that, and how are you sort of navigating that?
I didn't really put much thought into it in the beginning. I guess I personally have really good emotional resilience, which has helped me a lot. It's, really, I think what I've done is focused on I know why I started the podcast.
Yeah.
The reasons, the values that I wanted, which is I wanted it to be victim focused. I never wanted it to be about me. I never in a million years dreamed that anyone would know my name, but that is what has happened. And really those are the things that I have to go back to.
Yeah.
So when I navigate the difficult parts, and the difficult parts look like different things, they look like having to look at crime scene photos for a week, which is not enjoyable. Or the difficult part is me dragging myself, kicking and screaming out of my own comfort zone to sit in front of a camera, which is really not something I would 5 years ago have willingly done.
Yeah.
But again, I have to take it all back to, why did I start doing this? And are these hard things that I have to do actually getting me to moving me closer toward the goal?
Yeah.
So if they are, hopefully that little emotional resilience kicks in, which it usually has done so far. And yeah, just stay focused and compartmentalize the bad stuff, I think.
Yeah. Do you have a support system, like people that you can go to and just be like, this crap, have some baggage, I spoke to a woman who's a neuro-emotional coach. Her episode comes out tomorrow, and she's like, a lot of she one of the things she mentioned was, which kind of like spoke to me. She said a lot of guys will be very reserved and whatever else in arguments because they're trying to appease, the wife or the girlfriend or the partner, and they hide that bit, they kind of push down all of this. And I could imagine that for you. I mean, I've seen a few crime scene photos before with stuff that I've just been involved in the past, and like I've had to help out with camera footage and whatnot just from my job.
Of course,
and then you go hand it in, and the guys have got everything there, and you see stuff, and you're like, I don't want to see that.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have a support system, or are you just one of those tough cookies?
Yeah, I think, a bit of both. I think I've always been the type of person that's been good at handling this stuff on my own. I perhaps, to my own faults, have always been the person who is the support system and not asking for one. So far it's worked out for me. There are people in my life that if I needed to, I could offload on them. But I also need to consider that what I've really found is what my new normal is very weird for other people.
Absolutely.
So what's been really beneficial is me connecting. I mean, I've made amazing connections with people, ex-law enforcement, forensic pathologists, people who I can have conversations with about really horrible, gruesome stuff. And to them, that's their normal.
Yes.
Because what I do is not dinner table conversation.
No, sure.
So yeah, I'd say I do have a support system. Do I use it as often as I probably should? Probably not.
Yeah, no one ever does.
But I'm not curled up in the corner yet. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you've managed for 5 years, eh?
Yeah.
Jeepers.
Yeah.
That's insane. Like,
Yeah.
Your investigation. I'm trying to not make this very interviewish, but I've got so many questions, and it's just like it's coming out. But like your say interview process or your investigation process, that would fascinate me next level. I mean, where are you going along the lines of almost like a police detective would do? Is something gets alerted, or you get alerted to a crime? You're like, okay, now we start the homework, internet searches, yada yada yada, and then it's okay. I'm just imagine we've said like NCIS or one of those kinds of, spots where it's like, okay, there's this crime and, a cold case or whatever else. There was a series like that, I think.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, we start with there's a dead person and no evidence, and do we go from there,
Yeah. Look, I've really tried to draw a very hard line because I don't have any background in investigation, in law, in criminology, and I don't want to be one of these armchair detectives. That's always something I've wanted to steer away from. I believe that I play a role in the system, and there are professionals who know what they're doing. So what I do is I see my place as if if it's an unsolved case and detectives, family, private investigators think that me covering the case can add value, then I do so. And in unsolved cases where that is the case, and I've been told, yes, it's cool for you to cover it. I have found new information. I do that very delicately. It'll often be through people hearing that I'm looking into the case and coming to me. So there's a bit of an investigative element to it. But for my own purposes, I'm certainly looking at, even in solved cases, I'm laying out, I want the cold hard facts. I don't even want to look at news articles. I want court documents. I want, the actual evidence that was put forward in court if it's gone to court. And I do my own little sort of deep dives, and I've, because of the contacts that I've managed to make, I once had a blood spatter expert re-examine some stuff that was on a solved case, so it wasn't, interfering with the process.
Good old Dexter Morgan.
Yeah. Hopefully he's not a Dexter.
Hopefully, yes.
But yeah, so I mean, there's an element of investigation, and I guess my research process is investigative. I don't see myself as someone who thinks I'm going to solve a crime. I do understand the role that I could play in that, though. When leads come in, I'm not running down some guy trying to get his statement. I connect that person with a police officer.
So you're not doing like back alley meetups in the back end of Belleville or something, huh?
Not ones I can talk about, no.
Although, I mean, meeting me today this area is a bit interesting. That is incredible. I've got so much I want to know. There's a lot. There's a responsibility, like something that for me always, and I not battle with it, but I look at it even on this podcast to try and bring, and my aim is very different and whatever else, but I'm trying to bring like a lot of value and real value.
Yeah.
Like for me, I'm trying to not convince, but motivate people to be better, do more, et cetera, et cetera. But the last thing I personally would ever want is like some schmoes to come on here and be like, does the whole interview, chat, and then a bunch of people get scammed by his, by his course or whatever the story is.
100%.
For you, it's a lot heavier, I think, because there's like some serious lives involved.
Yeah.
And I mean, and it's very easy in the social media world that we live in now. It's like you look at your follower count and you go, if I just, angle this thing just a little more salaciously, or if I do this, or if there's this piece of information, but it's hearsay at the moment, and push it out there, I could get 20,000 more followers, or like, I'm assuming you don't do that at all.
No, I never have. And it's something that people have said to me, why aren't you doing this? And it's something I've seen other content creators do. As soon as a case hits the headlines, they're covering it on their podcast with little to no information. I could honestly never bring myself to do that.
Yeah.
It's just not my MO.
Yeah.
I know why I started this podcast, and it wasn't for clicks and views. And weirdly, I think that the fact that I stick to that, and I have taken on this duty of care to the victims that I talk about and their families, that has earned trust for me, in my reputation, and people come to me with their stories. But also, it's one of the reasons that I do get more follows and listens, because especially in true crime, there are so many people out there trying to do all these salacious things for clicks and views. So I think when people find someone who is authentically creating for a reason that you can actually see that what they're saying is real, you know, and it doesn't change. That is something that people have been attracted to.
Yeah. No, there's something to be said about authenticity.
Yeah, 100%.
It's like you look at the guys that are super real,
Yeah.
seem to get maybe not the biggest following, but you're going to get a good following, a dedicated following.
Yeah.
I kind of look at like Gary Vee in like the business space and the marketing space.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the biggest, you know, following. He's got a big following, but not the biggest. But he's real. You know,
Yeah.
it's very much, well, this is a day in my life, and and for him at least the content works sort of really, really well. Yeah. Your podcast, you've been going, as the podcast, was the book first, or was the podcast first? What was?
No, so the podcast was first,
Okay.
2019, and the books came as a result of the podcast.
As a result of the podcast. Yeah. Okay, cool. What was your very first one that you covered? It's the hardest question for the night.
Yeah, I know. I can picture the victim's face and I can picture the killer's face, but I cannot for the life of you tell you what it was called. And I can tell you the whole story. But their names do unfortunately evade me after 159 cases.
Jeez, yeah. How many episodes are you on so far?
So 159 full cases.
Okay.
And then additional interviews and mini-sodes and I started doing special episodes where I talk about specific crime topics like human trafficking and stuff like that.
Yeah. So it's okay. So there's like 159 full kind of episodes. Are you're not breaking up your? So I've seen some people that'll do like the true crime or similar, but they'll do like 3 or 4, you know, like sort of episodes almost on a single.
So there have been a few cases where I've done that, but it's it's the longer cases. So from Bradar, you know, the Van Bradar family murder, that was a long one, and I had a lot of evidence that was presented in court that I wanted to discuss in detail. So that I did 4 parts, and the Rosemary and Glorview case also 4 parts. But then it's episode 140, part 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Right. Okay. Cool. That makes sense. Yeah. So that Rosemary case, I don't know about it.
Okay.
What was that about?
It's wild. Yeah. It's so Rosemary and Glorview is a serial killer. She was
female serial killer.
Yeah, female serial killer.
Rare.
She well, I think they're not as rare as you think. They're just not they don't get caught as much as, because if you look at the way that is honestly my opinion. I just think that because women are less violent in their crimes and a lot more manipulative, they're a lot less likely to get caught.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're seeing, Reese, because we're seeing a lot of female offenders being arrested. And people think, why are they doing it now? What has changed? But I think what's changed is law enforcement's understanding that females are just as capable of committing these types of crimes as men are.
Yeah, but you're not wrong. I mean, I look at the news lately. There's a lot more like women coming to the fore, you know, when it comes to crime and whatever else.
Yeah.
And I think like there's a couple of school teachers that have been sort of caught with youngsters. There's a couple of murderers as well. There's a lot of fraud. Like there's quite a bit of fraud that's popped up. I mean, that young girl in Stellenbosch that got the 15 million or whatever it was into her card, Stellenbosch card or whatever, instead of the 1.5 grand, you know, like that kind of springs to mind.
Yeah.
So you think do you think it's because people are like detectives and law enforcement are investigating it more, or they now have a better understanding and are maybe opening their eyes a bit more?
I think that's definitely plays a big role. I also think that as women are becoming more financially independent, more able to move in the world the same way as men are able to, they have more opportunities to commit crimes in the same way that men have been able to in the past. So that equality we fought for is working always.
We got it. We can kill too.
But, I think that I sadly think that many, many, many murders where females have been perpetrators have not been solved in the past very much because of the societal belief that women do not commit violent crimes.
Yeah.
I mean, if we look at Rosemary and Lovia, for instance, you know, she's a serial killer who she was convicted of, I think, 6 murders, all her family members.
Good grief.
But there was many more than that she was not convicted of because they already had her for 6 life sentences. So, I mean, you're just using the system to, you know, it's not going to do anything more. But she was so, her crimes were really well thought out. You know, she was a police officer and she was taking out funeral policies and life insurance policies on her family members. And because of the way the Black community tends to have greater extended families, you know, whereas I as a white person will see my family as my mom, my dad, my sister, my brother. In Black communities, that's a lot larger.
Sure.
So her family members it wasn't strange that she was taking out funeral policies on them because it is very normal.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole market around it.
Absolutely.
I mean, some of I think there's guys that sell that kind of stuff here in this building, and you can have up to 21 family members on your you know, burial policy kind of thing.
And because I mean, sadly, you know, what she overtook as well was that because in many African cultures, burial is such an important part of the grieving process, and she milked that. You know, so she was taking out these life insurances, funeral policies, and then either having her family members killed or killing them herself.
Good grief.
And just the way she went about it was mind-blowing. The coldness, you know, terrifying.
I can imagine, oh gosh, like, and even now it kind of like, there's some very limited circumstances where I would consider sort of hurting someone to the point where they could, you know, die or whatever. Like it's very few. I mean,
we all have our line.
Yeah, there is a line. You know, mess with my wife, you're going to get the horns. You know, like, you know, mess with my family. There's and then there's even limits to that. You know, yes. But I mean, I've been in all kinds of weird situations. Like my wife and myself were robbed at gunpoint, and like whilst everything was like, I had many opportunities. There was a bunch of young guys. I don't know if they were being initiated or what. And there was one guy that was maybe 21, and he was the guy with the gun, and he was by me. And he didn't know what he was doing. He was waving the gun all over the show. I had 5, 6 different opportunities where I could have taken, you know, like grabbed his hand, elbowed him to the head, and, you know, wrestled the gun away and put one in him or something like that. Yeah. And even in that moment, I was like, it's so much safer just to, take the watch, take the wallet, whatever, you know, take the cell phone. We can get more out of it. Well, we can buy a new one. You know, that sucks. And, you know, all of that. Yeah. Jeepers creepers. Gosh. So now she went around, this Rosemary went, and you say she was very cold. What was what was it just calculating? Was it really well worked out? Or was it the how they got killed that was cold?
No, it was really, I mean, firstly, the fact that these were her family members, that she was seeing the...
Yeah, sorry.
That's how wasn't me.
No, that's fine. Let's lift it back up to you. Let's see where it
there we go.
We'll just give that a tighten. Okay, let's give it the old vice grip.
Cool, perfect. So, I mean...
we live and we learn with our podcasts.
I mean, certainly just the fact that, they were her family members. She was seeing that grief play out in front of her. I mean, she killed her own sister, her own, she wasn't convicted of killing her own children, but there's a lot of evidence that she did kill her own children.
That's dark.
And watching her mother grieve for the sibling, for her mother's children, her siblings, that she was killing. It was just, it boggles the normal mind as to how you can see that happening in front of you time after time and still be okay with it because you're getting money out of it.
Yeah.
So that's really where the coldness came in.
Do they do you know how much money was like how much money roughly she got out of the whole deal?
So it varied. She did have a huge gambling problem. So she she burned through that money. But it varied. It was, some of them, it was like 7,000 Rand, 30,000 Rand. One was 700,000 Rand.
Good grief.
But you could see, as with most serial killers, you see the escalation. And with her, it was no different. Towards the end, she was escalating where she was killing someone every couple of months. Wow. And that's how she got caught, which is how most serial killers get caught. There was no difference with her.
Good grief. Do you follow any of the sort of like incarceration of people and whatnot once they've been caught and what? So the reason I'm bringing it up is like, I don't know if you've seen that video of that guy that's like, we're not suffering.
Yeah. So I've got very involved in parole, in the parole side of things, through some of the books that I've written and through some of the cases I've covered. And I've been lucky enough to become quite good friends with people that work in the Department of Correctional Services. So I would call it first-hand information, not about individual offenders, because it would be unethical from their side, but about what it really is like in there. And, firstly, that guy that was he was in a awaiting trial section. So that's what people.
Not as salacious as it sounds.
No, he wasn't sitting in maximum security. Not that. In maximum security, as we saw in the raids, they've got lots of stuff they shouldn't have. They've got cell phones. Look at Thabo Bester.
TVs. I saw like 20, 30, 40 cell phones lying there. A TV. Fine, it was an old CRT box TV, but still.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And modems and
Wi-Fi routers and 5G routers.
and what it comes down to really is DCS resources. If they could stop all of that stuff and it didn't just appear again the next day, they would.
Yeah.
But it's a matter of how many wardens do you have to 5,000 inmates, and how do you even stop that happening? You're just trying to make sure they don't kill each other.
Fair. Yeah. Do you think this new minister is going to get some change done? He seems to be new broom sweeps clean now.
Yeah, I was about to use that exact phrase.
A month or two in.
Yeah.
But do you think long term he's going to be able to make some change?
Look, I think if he focuses that energy on the right things, I wasn't too pleased to see him immediately talking about the death penalty, because it's a moot point in South Africa and our constitution is never going to allow for it. So don't waste your resources there. I will say that after Sizzlers has been published, I've been chatting to a few people about trying to implement some real parole reform, and we have got him involved on a couple of conversations, and he seems interested to engage, which is more than we had before.
Fantastic.
So with previous ministers that I've tried to engage with, it's been extremely difficult and closed down and that sort of thing. And just the engagement is a good start.
Yeah.
So fingers crossed.
I think if conversations are being had, that's where it starts.
Yeah.
The second you've got a breakdown of communication in anything, that's the beginning of the end. So if you're able to keep those lines of communication open,
Absolutely.
then there's always a chance. There's always a possibility for some kind of change and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you made a nice segue into
the books.
into the books. Okay, so beyond doing the podcast, you're an author on top of like overachiever.com. But I think it's a natural sort of progression into it, because as much as people obviously enjoy watching the podcast, and like I've seen comments and like people enjoy it, they love it, the content's good, you've done your homework, you've structured it all really well. There's still those bookworms out there and people that love to read. How did the book journey start?
So really, I've wanted to be a published author since I was 6 years old. I was a hobby writer in crime fiction for many, many years. Many failed attempts at getting published when I was in my 20s, and then just sort of let the dream die. And then I started the podcast, and when the audience started growing, I thought, okay, well, I can probably self-publish a book one day,
Yeah.
and that'll be one of my little dreams ticked off, and I'll probably sell a few copies. And then in 2022, I got a message on Facebook from a publisher. There was a offender called Morne Haramsa who was being released on parole in that year, and the publisher wanted to write a book about the case and the fact that he was getting released on parole and everything around that. And they had found my podcast episode that I had done on that case.
Okay.
So her name is Melinda Ferguson, the publisher, and I guess she thought I was a decent enough storyteller. And I had all the research already, so she asked me if I wanted to write a book on the case. And had 4 months to write the book, which was
seems a little bit bit min. And I'm looking at the books now; they're not thin books.
No. I mean, the first one was tight, but it was because he was getting released that year. We wanted to release it while it was still relevant. But I had all the research done, and one of the jobs that I had been doing, I mean, the podcast, it's, the way I've described the journey, it sounds like the podcast took off and blew up and yay, everything was wonderful. But I was working like 7 different freelance jobs at one stage while the podcast was going. And one of those was I was ghostwriting for a Canadian company.
Okay.
So even before the book idea was thought of, I was writing 30,000 word ebooks in 2 weeks. So it was great practice for Samurai Sword, and amazing how things just work out. You get the skills and the things that you need when you need them.
Yes. Jeepers, 30,000 words in two weeks.
Yeah.
I've done a little bit of copywriting in the past, and I've always wanted to be an author. I don't know if it's just a thing that everyone kind of goes through. Like, I wanted to be a rock star because I was like, I'm a muso. We're like, yes. And I had my band and it kind of didn't work. And I wrote. So I'm quite heavy. Well, I'm a big fan of anime and that style of, sort of like Naruto, Dragon Ball Z, which all the anime, like, diehards be like, that's sissy stuff. You don't know about anime. But like that kind of almost style. And you don't see novels kind of in that. So you see like graphic novels, sure, and that kind of thing with the manga and that kind of thing, but you don't see that. And I in my own dyslexic way, started trying to write a book, which it didn't end well. But
why not? Yeah, I mean, it's been incredible. I absolutely know how lucky I am when I tell other published writers about a publisher DMing me on Facebook with a
that's
book
insane.
contract. It just doesn't happen.
Yes.
Okay? So I'm well aware of how fortunate I am, and and then since then it's just, after that was Sizzlers. I released Sizzlers this year, and then I've just co-authored Killer Stories as well. And it's incredible, and I feel really, really fortunate. It's been a hell of a lot of hard work.
No, for sure.
A lot of people tend to say, oh, you're so lucky to be able to do what you do. And yes, I am absolutely lucky, and I'm very grateful. But it's funny how sometimes the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Yes.
Because I went from working a 9 to 5 to working 17, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah. People don't know what goes into this kind of stuff. I mean, the even just my little podcast that I do, and I keep it very simple.
Yeah.
You're like very, very. I don't have to do massive homework or research. I go, that's an interesting person. We sit down, we have an hour-long conversation.
Yeah.
It's very easy. There's a little bit of homework to make sure the person's not some kind of scam artist or dodgy, and most of the time, like, I get referred, people. So like most recent guest has already put me onto 3 people.
Cool.
And it's like,
That's great.
Wow. You know, you just get this text message a week after the podcast comes out. And then next thing is like, hey, Des, I've got this friend of mine. They do this. I think it's going to work perfectly for you. They're very scared to come on the podcast, but here's her number, you know, and like, okay, cool. And then it's like, hey, there's this guy and he's got, you know, a massive like chain store, whatever else, and built it from nothing with his dad. And I was like, what? Okay,
Amazing.
cool, you know?
Yeah.
But I mean, the amount of blood, sweat, and tears, which is maybe a little corny in terms of what we're talking about. I mean, I've cut my hours down. I do 8.5 hours at the moment on every episode.
Cool.
And you must be doing a ton more. On your stuff. And then never mind the books. I mean, that's then...
Yeah. It's difficult to measure because each case is different and each, you know, medium is different. And often there's a crossover as well. You know, so I'll be doing a lot of the stuff I talk about in the books. Our minds have already researched for the podcast.
Yes.
You know, but it's laborious and it's a lot of work. But the interesting part is that really, I mean, I'm watching documentaries for research. I'm reading papers. I'm, you know, academic papers. It's all stuff I would probably be doing anyway.
Okay.
It's just
you're
my
that
job.
Weirdo.
I am that weirdo.
I'm not.
I'm just now doing it as a job. So yeah.
No, fair points. Yeah. I look at myself as well. I get to talk to people, and I love networking, and you know, you do it for business, but now it's this whole weird different vibe. Yeah, it's fun. I don't think you could do it. I don't think you can actually do the kinds of things that, you know, do a podcast or write a book or whatever else, unless you truly enjoy it.
No, absolutely.
Because there comes a point.
You can do it, but you won't do it well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, there comes a point at, you know, midnight, the day before you have to put an episode out, and you're still finalizing your edit, and you still haven't written the description, and you fighting
last
with
week.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, for me, it's like my wife's in bed sleeping, and I'm sitting on the couch, or you know, or I work until midnight, then I'm up at 4 again, and you know, like, and you're sitting there waiting for that upload to tick because you've got 2 hours before the damn thing goes live, and you're like, internet, go. It's not as fun as everybody thinks it.
Well, that's why I think why pod fade is so, you know, podcast not lasting is so common. And in my genre, even more so.
Yeah.
You know, I've tried to help many people start their own true crime podcasts, and some are still ticking over and going a little bit slowly, but sticking to it. But it's the added, I mean, the content in this is obviously an added thing to it, but people do not realize how much work it is.
Yeah.
You know, they see guys getting sponsorship deals and millions of YouTube subscribers, and it looks so cool.
Yeah, $250 million for Joe Rogan, his latest one. And we're like, what?
Yeah, it's but it's, I mean, for me, it's all worth it.
Yeah. How do you fight at 159 episodes, you've experienced pod fade 3 or 4 or 5 times already, like, or at least gotten to the point where it's like, okay, hold on, I need to pull my socks up and carry on with this thing. How do you get through it?
I think that's really what happened with me is once I started having 2 things: brands approaching me to sponsor the podcast and selling out advertising before time. That's sort of, you have to do it. You don't have a choice. But then the other side of it, which was actually more important and weighed on me more, was families starting to approach me and saying, this is our story, whether it was solved or unsolved. And my list of those cases where families had actually taken time out of their lives to contact me and ask me to talk about their family's cases, that list started growing and growing and growing. And to me, that is the biggest responsibility. I cannot let those people down. And I'm just one of those people that if I'm responsible for something for someone else, that Pardon me, that's it.
Yeah, you keep on going until it's done.
Yeah, no, it's, it doesn't matter if I'm comatose afterwards. So I think that's really what has driven it. And I don't think and also the listeners as well, everything that I've been able to achieve, yes, it's been my hard work and all the rest of it, but it's all been down to this huge group of South Africans that put their trust behind me and told other people about my podcast and listened to it and, spoke about it on social media. That audience of True Crime South Africa listeners that has really been the driver behind the success, so it's for them as well.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Jeez. Okay, so your most recent book, I know you're not quite doing a signing tour, but there are a couple of events that I've seen, one in Joburg, one in Cape Town. Have they happened yet, or are they still happening?
So for
Killer Stories.
For Killer Stories.
Yeah.
So Killer Stories, the events are still to come.
Awesome.
There's a signing and a launch in Cape Town 10th and 13th of August.
Of August, okay.
Yeah,
wow, that's close then, yeah.
Yeah, and then there's going to be a Joburg launch as well on the 15th of August.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
You co-authored the book. How is that experience compared to just doing it yourself?
It is actually very cool, and it's quite a cool story that also had its genesis on the podcast, actually. So in 2019, when I was sort of delving out into I was now unemployed, read self-employed. I found this paper on serial killings, a PhD paper online, and by Dr. Bryn Hodgkiss. And read it. It was like 670 pages, but I was fascinated because it was like real stuff.
Yes.
Okay. And I wanted to interview him on the podcast. So I couldn't get hold of him anywhere, couldn't find him anywhere. So it turned out he'd actually moved to the UK, and he's a South African, but he'd moved to the UK and wasn't in the field anymore. He's in change management now, working for the NHS, which is why I couldn't find him. But eventually did. Yeah. So I found him on Twitter and did like a public tweet because I couldn't inbox him, and said to him, I've read your paper online. I'd like to interview you on my podcast. And that really started, I think, what I can call a friendship, which he and I bonded over having very, very similar ethics around true crime and crime and creating content around that. And he was just super excited, firstly, that someone had read his PhD.
Fair, yeah. I mean, you're like probably a handful.
And all these years later, he said to me, and he says in the book as well, that he had so he interviewed 13 serial killers in prison for his PhD and recorded.
Yikes.
Yeah, and recorded the interviews. And he thought about these recordings and these transcripts just gathering dust, which, and as the true crime genre sort of took off, he thought to himself, this is like gold, but I don't know what to do with it. He didn't know who to trust with it because there's ethics around it having been an anonymous study that was done at the time. So as soon as he and I sort of linked up, guess he found he could trust me. And that's when it was initially going to be a series of podcasts.
Okay.
And then after I published Samurai Sword, I said to him, I think we should write a book. And that's where that started. So really, I mean, it was easy. With Bryn, it was, I think with anyone else, it may have been difficult. But Bryn and I really just gelled. He's a very cool person. He's very down to earth, very smart man, obviously, great to learn from. But he and I think, were, if anyone was going to work well on a project together, it was going to be us two. So it was actually quite, and it was quite nice in a way, because it really is, I say it's Bryn's book that I've contributed to because it's his intellectual property. And it was quite nice to have someone else have the bulk of responsibility for a change. And I was just like writing the bits and pieces. It was an amazing experience though.
Yeah. So is this a collection, I'm assuming, of then stories based on that PhD work, or is it different stuff?
It is. So it's a bit of it's a true crime / narrative psychology melding. It's about those people he spoke to in prison. We do keep them anonymous, and we do that for two reasons. So we do it because the study conditions, but also because what he brings out of these is not just, psychological conditions.
Yeah.
He talks about the narrative psychology, which is the stories that these men told themselves about their crimes and themselves and their childhoods that contributed to where they ended up.
Sure.
So those are that's what he sort of brings to the fore. And then later in the book, we discuss how those stories that these people were telling themselves are not that different from the stories that so-called normal people tell themselves.
Yes.
And where that difference, how big is that difference? And, why do some people end up going with that same story down one road and someone else goes down another road? And how can you steer yourself correctly?
Yeah. Well, we're all able to justify almost anything. I mean, it's you.
If we want to.
Yeah. There's 100 Rand on the counter there, and you take and you go, well, I'm hungry, or that it's my boss's money, and stuff them because they treat me badly, and that's I'm on the moral high ground, and I'm doing this bad thing and trying to justify it. I mean, I don't know what the justification is to take someone's life, but I'm pretty sure there is. You kind of play devil's advocate. You never know on like these stories until maybe you do a podcast on it. But what goes into someone's brain to get them to that point that it's like, okay, cool, And I mean, I can almost imagine, okay, someone's done something terrible to me, and I then will reciprocate in kind. But that's only one tiny little portion. Then it's like you said, like that Rosemary chick who is just like flat out killing her family for $7,000 or 30,000. I mean, no.
Yeah.
No, I've had Barneys with my brothers. It's not enough.
No, absolutely.
I want a lot more now.
Absolutely. And I also think, it's not even so much, there is a bit of justification to it, but it's also, when readers start reading this, they're going to start self-identifying with a lot of the stuff. So,
for sure,
people who may have experienced, maybe grown up in a home where there's substance abuse, you start to tell yourself a story about who you are as a person based on what you've experienced. And at some point, you have to sit back and go, how much of that story is actually true? And how much of it is just something I've been telling myself all along?
Yeah.
I used to tell myself a story that I could never work for myself because I need to work for a boss because I need structure. And I told myself that story for 30 years of my life and believed it.
Yeah. I need structure, I need the dependency, I need the regularity, salary, and the guarantee, and I'm the opposite to that.
Yeah.
So I'm all captain, entrepreneur, see a business idea behind every bush. Yeah. And for the last 6 years, I've been working for bosses. It's counter me, but I've had to do it to survive and to get to a point. I wanted to get married, and without a job, I wouldn't if I was doing the solopreneur thing or the entrepreneur thing. That might not have happened.
So it's a fascinating book, and Bryn and I have also. I've tried to very much keep my private life out of the public eye for a long time because this wasn't what I signed up for. But Bryn and I decided to share a little bit about our own lives in the book. Just not to make it about us, but we thought we needed that as a bit of a segue for readers to be able to identify themselves in these killers.
But it's a healthy thing. I'm going to it's a healthy thing to do because people always see themselves as a hero. If you watch the Avengers, no one is Loki.
Yeah.
No one's like, I resonate with Loki. I'm that guy. Like everyone's like, no, I'm Captain America or I'm Wonder Woman or okay, I'm crossing boundaries here between DC and Marvel, but no, there's some haters out there. Don't kill me. But I listened to a lecture from Jordan Peterson where he spoke about that. And he said, like, if you are able to actually take yourself and listen to the story and not identify necessarily with the hero, but to be able to say, yes, I can see myself being Hitler. Yeah. Like I can understand why and not condone. Nowadays, I don't know, there's this big grey blur over everything. You go, I can understand it. Oh, you're a terrible person. You like this. You like this. Like, no, hold on. You can see, I can understand how someone can go and steal. I can. I've been this close. Yeah. To try and, do someone over so that I can have money because rent's due in 10 days and I've got no money. And, or whatever it is. And then you multiply that down to, well, you're living in, like most of South Africa lives in horrendous conditions. Yeah. You don't have a future. You don't have anything. You've pushed to the point where your kids maybe are starving and you see an opportunity. And maybe that opportunity pans out. Yeah. And that reinforces something in you. And then, well, here's another opportunity and another and another. Yeah. And next thing you're blowing up armored cars next to the highway. And I'm like, I can see how you got there.
Absolutely.
You 5 years ago would never have thought that's going to be that. I mean, I look at myself just in the podcast. 2 years ago, not a shot would I have imagined that I'd be sitting here, having a chat with you about true crime and all of this kind of stuff. Yeah. But there's a whole bunch of things, and a lot of it there's a chunk of it that was horrendous, that led me, to this point where I'm now. Cool, I've got the studio, I've got some fancy lights, I've got some, nice microphones that fall over and, and it's like, I can see it. I think like humanizing and maybe drawing those parallels is definitely, like, I see a massive amount of value in that.
Yeah, I mean, I get a lot, a lot of the offenders that I talk about did have really difficult childhoods. And a lot of my listeners have voiced their difficulty in navigating, feeling sorry for them, feeling empathy for them, but how, then feeling bad themselves because they're feeling empathy for this horrific killer. And I always say to them, it is entirely possible to have empathy for the child that person was. Yes. And not condone what they did as an adult. Yeah.
Christians kind of talk about it. They go like, "What love the sinner, not the sin," is a kind of thing. Yeah, I guess. Absolutely. We can totally love that person, or at least empathize with that person.
With what happened to them when they did not have control.
Yeah. I mean, look, we're a product of a lot of things, upbringings and that kind of stuff. Is there, I mean, I don't know how much you've dived into the stats and whatnot, but a while back I watched a video, there was numbers out of the United States, and they were talking about incarcerated sort of people, murderers, serial killers, that kind of thing. And one of the really big significant or statistically significant variables was a father or a male figure, or that father figure in the home. Do you see, I don't know how much you've dived into it. Maybe I'm just putting you on the spot there.
No, I don't mind. I think there certainly is a correlation. And that is undoubtedly a huge problem in South Africa.
Massive.
I think the last number we had was, I mean, it doesn't necessarily correlate to whether they have father figures, but I think 60% of birth certificates in the last, I don't know what the period was, did not have fathers registered on the birth certificate.
Sure.
So take from that what you will.
There's two sides to that argument as well, because it's like, well, was the father not there, or were they listing it so they could get a SASSA grant?
That too.
I saw that on a podcast somewhere. I can't remember who it was. Someone was talking about it, and they're like, well, that's kind of what the guys are doing.
No, for sure. But I mean, really? If we take the Western Cape as an example, the gangs here are a huge issue.
Massive, yeah.
And undoubtedly they're a proper figure to follow, whether it's male or female, can often make all the difference. You know, the kids that are getting pulled into the gangs are often, sadly, kids that have their parents have substance abuse issues, or their parents have died, and they're living with extended family who are too thinly spread to look after them properly. You know, and so that is a clear correlation to crime. You know, it absolutely, and, you know, I don't want to make it a moral thing, you know, the breakdown of the nuclear family and all of this, because families look different. And, you know, what we consider supportive figures look different. Children who might grow up in an orphanage type situation, a home situation, you know, a live-in home, they may have as good prospects as any other children.
Well, I think that's why I sort of clarified. I know, like, Jordan Peterson talks about it a lot, and he says, like, the people that don't have that, you know, so that family structure, the father figure, end up looking in places that lead to almost like gang type stuff, because you're there's this dude or this lady in charge, you know, and you're a bunch of siblings almost trying to win their approval. It looks like a family. It feels like a family. They hold grudges like family, you know, like, well, maybe even hyper, you know, family
absolutely.
kind of thing. I've had to play, even in my own life, I've had to play big brother or, you know, father figure to a few people, you know, where and sometimes it's very temporary. It's a year or two, and they're in need of that. And it's a tough one to see with, especially young guys. I mean, for me, it's I'm a guy, so I see it, and I look how destructive. And you look with the toxic masculinity thing and whatever else. It's like, when did masculinity become bad? You know, hold on. There's been this degradation in society, which just leads to this horrible de-evolution of our youth. They end up being the people that are in your books, you know, or on your podcast, and it's.
It's quite terrifying.
It's horrifying. You know?
No, it absolutely is.
And then I look at there's a guy I'm desperately want to get on to my podcast. I can't remember his name exactly, but he runs an organization called Father and Nation, and he's here in South Africa. And it's like their whole thing is like, cool. They find youngsters that don't have dads, pair them almost like Big Brother, you know, pair them up, fantastic. You know, with cool. These sort of like father figures and whatnot.
That's fantastic.
And I'm like, that's maybe part of the, you know, the solution.
Absolutely. And I think it's it really comes down, I think, to a sense of belonging and a sense of structure and a sense of, you know, which can come in many different forms. But if that's one way that these young men can find it, then fantastic. You know, desperately needed.
Solve the issues.
Yeah.
Okay, so you brought all three of your books tonight.
I did, yes.
We had a chat earlier, and I was like, hey, do you want to bring some of your books along? We're going to give these away. Cool.
Absolutely.
So we'll run a little competition. I'm actually closing down. It's so weird. Like, I've had a couple of people who have now, like, slowly but surely started giving stuff away. Cool. We've got a tattoo artist who's we're drawing on like Friday, so that's been quite cool. I'm excited to see that one.
Fantastic.
Someone's going to get a 3,000 Rand voucher for that, which is that's a
Go
bit of work.
Enter.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, well, just watch the video, comment on it, subscribe to the channel.
I'll do that.
How it works. Okay, so the three books. Can we just go through the names again quickly?
Yeah. So it's Samurai Sword Murder.
Mm-hmm. What's that about? In like
that
one
is
sentence?
About
in 3 sentences.
A young man, a teenager in Krugersdorp in 2008 who went to a school with a samurai sword, murdered one of his classmates, and attempted to kill 3 other people.
Wow.
That was a long sentence.
That's fine.
Well, his sentence wasn't very long. Mine was. Then Sizzlers, which is about a mass murder that occurred in 2003 in a gay so-called massage parlor in Sea Point.
I have not heard about that. Okay.
I'm surprised. I'm actually not surprised.
That sounds huge.
That's why I'm doing it again. Why I'm bringing it to the fore, because it's it's a very important case for a lot of different reasons.
For sure.
Yeah, and then third one is Killer Stories, which is about the stories that real serial killers told themselves about their lives and their crimes and how they are not that different from us.
Yeah, real life, man.
Yeah.
Sure. All right. I ask a question from everybody. We get great varying responses on it. What does growing a pair mean to you?
I often say, so I'm not going to take this to a feminist slant.
Oh, good. It's not a chauvinistic saying.
No, not at all. No, it's not.
Yeah.
So that when I saw the name of your podcast, the first thing it made me think of was how many years ago? About 10 years ago, when I first moved to Cape Town, I sat in the office of a man who is sadly now deceased, who took a chance on me. And I had been a PA in Joburg at the time within the same group of companies. And I needed a job in Cape Town when I moved here. And he decided that I would be a fantastic sales manager. And I thought he was insane. But gave me the job, and I was actually a damn good sales manager. I was pretty much the best sales manager that ever had, if I have to say so myself. He was right. But the grow a pair thing comes from, and hopefully female and maybe a few male listeners will identify with this, being in a male, almost every room I'm in is male dominated. And I often joke and I say, you don't have to worry about me. I've got bigger balls than most men I know. But that means something different to everyone.
Absolutely.
And for me, it doesn't mean being audacious or mean or bitchy or whatever, being aggressive. For me, that means I know what I'm capable of, and if I can see what someone else is capable of and they can't see it, it'll be my finest moment if I can help them see what they're capable of, as others have done for me. So I guess helping other people grow a pair.
Fantastic.
Because others have done that for me.
That's perfect. That's a great answer. I love watching almost everybody stops and is quiet for 10 seconds, and it's just this resounding silence. And then it's like, yo. And I enjoy the female perspective. Because I normally say to people, if they kind of go, oh, that's a little chauvinistic, and I'm like, no, it's not.
Not at all.
Girls can grow a pair of ovaries. Like it's that simple. It works both ways. It's not a chauvinistic thing. No, it's
absolutely.
just for me, it's a get up and go and knock your head against the wall until you've got a bald spot.
Yep.
But
absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so
I've been wanting to get a podcaster on for a while, so
Cool.
it's fun to have someone that understands sort of what I'm going through and being able to just chat and dive into your life. And this is something I wouldn't normally run across in my normal life. So when I saw you on the group and I saw you've got the book out, and I was like, oh, great, this is perfect timing.
It's been awesome. Thank you. I really, really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Alrighty, that's us. Grow a pair.